Randy, you ready? IT's ready. We're just waiting on Randy. Joe, you want to talk already? You're on the. Joe wants to talk. You're okay, Joe. You're okay. Yeah, you're good. We haven't started. Let's go ahead and get the meeting started. It is 6 o'clock. Madam Clerk, could you please call roll?
Commissioner Diedrich?
Here.
Commissioner Long? Here. Commissioner Madrid?
Here.
Vice Chair Thomas?
Here.
Chair Ladue?
And I am here. I'm going to have Michael lead us in the pledge, please. Thanks, Mike. Okay, moving along, there are no presentations tonight. We're moving on to the agenda for tonight. Are there any modifications to the agenda?
There are none.
Okay, perfect. Commissioners, can I please get approval for tonight's agenda? All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none. Public comments. Are there any requests to speak tonight?
There are none.
Okay. And, okay, so we'll move on. We need approval of the minutes. Can I ask the Planning Commission for approval of the April 12th, 2023 minutes? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none. Moving right along. We're down to our public hearing items 9.1. Could the Planning Manager please introduce this item?
Thank you, Chair. The item before you tonight is going to be presented by Principal Planner Ryan Fowler. He was also responsible for assisting us with developing our new ordinance for utility scale ordinance that we have. Also in the audience, we have Fire Protection Engineer David Myers that has assisted us throughout the process as well, and he's available here today to answer questions that probably none of us can answer. So we're glad he's here, so thank you.
And IT, if I could just get the PowerPoint up and the, thank you. All right, good evening, Commission, Chair, members of the public. I'm Ryan Fowler, Principal Planner, here to present the Nova Power Bank project. Includes two applications. First is the plot plan 22-0154 and a conditional use permit 22-0155. The project is located just south of Highway 74, east of Antelope Road, southwest of Matthews Road, and north of McLaughlin Road. And see, it was previously occupied by the Inland Empire Energy Center. So I'll go into a little bit more detail about that in a couple of slides. But next, I'll talk about the general plan land use designation. So the subject site has a designation of Menifee North Specific Plan 260 and heavy industrial. It's the same designation to the west, and then to the east is that same specific plan. To the south, where the SCE corridor, transmission corridor is located, it's designated public utility corridor, and to the north, it's heavy industrial. The zoning is, in this case, identical, so it's exactly the same for the project site and all surrounding properties. And then just a little bit of background. So it was mentioned that we did a recent development code amendment related to this particular use. So going back to September of last year, it came before the commission and city council. We amended the development code, and that essentially encompassed four different areas. One is we had an update to the allowable use table, specifically for the zones of BP and heavy industrial, so BP Business Park and heavy industrial, to allow for this particular use. And then there was a special section set up that put in place special standards for utility scale battery energy storage systems. I'll just refer to them as BESSs going forward. And then we updated some definitions within the code relative to this use, and then all those same changes were also folded into the Menifee North specific plan as well. And sorry, just go back real quick. Just this image right here is an image of what we're going to be talking about tonight. It's what is currently being proposed for the project site. It's the battery unit that'll be placed throughout the project site. So on this next slide, I'm showing the layout here. What the applicant is proposing is really redevelopment of that former Inland Empire Energy Center. And so the reason why this site is really because of that former use. It already has a lot of the infrastructure that's already there in place. So I'll talk about that in the next slide. But they're going to be essentially replacing what was decommissioned. That IEEC was decommissioned in 2020, and in its place they're putting battery energy storage system, a utility scale BESS in its place. So right now there's a 680 megawatt interconnection capacity that's there. You can see it on kind of the right-hand side of the site plan. There's an interconnection there that ties into the SCE grid. And so they would go up to that capacity of storage capacity. And so some of the infrastructure that's there right now, it would actually remain. For instance, you have the switch yard, the control room, a warehouse, and then at the lower left and lower right, there's some storm drain basins, and so the storm drain system is already in place. That's all part of the plot plan application. And then for the conditional use permit, that's simply to authorize the BESS use, and that's required per code. So what is the purpose, and how does this project, how would it operate? So the main purpose is to support California's electrical grid operations and advance their renewable portfolio standards. And so one way they would do that is they're going to store and discharge power for entities that sell to the customer. So, and they're also providing support for the grid reliability. So how that happens is you have, in this case, in the lower right-hand image, you have solar, you have wind. Those don't necessarily, when those produce power, they're not necessarily corresponding to when peak demand is. So typically, you come home after work, flip on the air conditioning unit. That's when the peak demand would be for the grid. But photovoltaic, wind, they don't necessarily correspond to that timing. So this would basically take the power from those sources, store it within the batteries, and then when peak demand hits, they can release it back into the system. And we can talk a little bit more about the actual units now. So you can see here's a rendering of the actual site, and there's the units spread throughout. Those are the individual battery systems. They consist of cooling systems. They have fire detection systems within them, management systems for controls, an inverter, transformers, and then alternate current collection systems within them as well. And then, as I mentioned before, they're utilizing some of the existing interconnection equipment that's already on site. They can do that to the greatest extent possible. And no change is actually required for upgrades to the transmission grid since it already exists because of the former use. Now the actual units, what do they look like? What size are they? They're approximately about 8 feet tall, 42 feet long, and 11 feet wide. And you see another rendering here of how that would appear aesthetically. The project, our code, when we adopted it back in September, had requirements for screening for this, specific to this use. And so they meet all those screening requirements contained in the code, and in some cases, which I'll describe in the next couple slides, they go beyond that. Site layout. So there's 2 existing site driveways on Antelope Road. That's shown with the blue arrows there. So they're existing. They wouldn't change locations, and that's what would be utilized. And then the project is conditioned to construct the half width of San Jacinto Road, which is the road on the east side. They would do their half width plus the standard 12 feet on the opposite side of the center line. And then to the south of the project is the Riverside County Flood Control Open Channel and the SCE transmission. So you can imagine there's probably not going to be development between this project site and McLaughlin, which is right below those. So we're asking, and we've conditioned the project to construct the southerly extension shown with the orange arrows here from the project's lower corners down to McLaughlin Road. And that's about 300 feet approximately. Parking, so these are existing. So I've zoomed in here on the parking lot. There's 47 spaces currently. So the code requires, our new code that we adopted, 1 space per employee of the max shift. They're expecting typically 2 to 3 per shift in 12-hour shifts, but anticipate maybe a max shift of 9. So they're well beyond the 47 spaces. They're well beyond the requirement by having the 47 spaces. Landscaping. So per the code, 25 feet would be required on Antelope Road, 25 feet on San Jacinto, and Russell Road. Russell Road is kind of the upper right-hand corner. It's a diagonal road in that location. And then on the north and the south, there's 0 setback required per the code, per this zone. However, the project is providing on Antelope Road, which you can see is the upper right-hand image. That's Antelope Road right there. That's all existing landscaping, and that's approximately 50 feet running all along that frontage there. So they're double the required setback. And that will include multiple rows of landscaping and multiple rows of trees within that landscaping. And then on the southerly side of the project, which is the image you see on the lower right, that's in the foreground. You see the towers for the SEE transmission corridor, and you see the flood control channel kind of in the middle ground, and then beyond that is the actual site. And along that boundary is 57 feet of landscaping and multiple rows of trees proposed. So that's beyond the obviously 0 foot setback requirement. It's all going to be visible from McLaughlin Road. There's nothing really intervening, so that's why they've beefed that up with the 57 feet. And then in total, there's 20% of the site would be landscaped, really all along the perimeter. Again, there'd be tree-lined landscaping along the main entry, along the perimeters, the multiple rows of trees. They're conditioned to replace, repair missing and damaged trees, and trees in poor health, and our landscape consultant went out and inspected that as well. And then I know aesthetics is of interest to the commission and the public for this type of facility, so what we're showing here is how the project would be screened. So just a quick explanation of this. So the orange is proposed decorative block wall. The light blue is tubular steel, and then the navy color is existing chain link fencing. So the reason why it was set up this way is at the upper left, you're basically at grade, so you'd be seeing into the site at that point. So that's why there is decorative block in that location. And then, and I'm talking about on the west-hand side, on the left side. And then as you kind of go down, there's buildings that block views into the site, and you can see it there in the image, the photo, the upper right photo. There's buildings in the way, so you wouldn't really see the battery units in that location. So in that location, there's existing chain link. They're going to swap it out with tubular steel, make that a little nicer. And then as you go to the lower left portion of the site, or the southwest portion, the elevation changes and it gets higher, so you don't have direct views into the site. You can see in the image on the top right, it starts to increase in size as you go to the south. So that's all tubular steel. In addition, the battery units are set back about 200 feet from the curb, the closest ones are. And then along the southerly side, as I mentioned, it's about 300 feet from McLaughlin Road, and then you have multiple rows of trees in between. So at that location, they have existing chain link. So we're proposing, and the staff recommended that they just retain that in that location due to the distance and the intervening landscaping. And then on the east side, you have block wall where there's views into the site of the units along San Jacinto Road. And then there's a stretch adjacent to the switch yard where they're going to swap out the existing chain link with tubular steel because of the distance that those units are set back so deep. And then views from Highway 74, which is to the northeast into the site, those will be blocked by the upper right decorative block wall. Now, one question that always comes up on these types of projects is are they safe? So one requirement of our code and also of the fire code is that the applicant prepare a hazard mitigation analysis. So what is that? It's a technical opinion prepared by a professional fire protection engineer. And basically they're evaluating the consequences of different types of failures. So everything from thermal runaway to voltage surges, short circuits, battery ventilation and exhaust failures. So the hazard mitigation and analysis runs through each one of those scenarios and how they're offset or how they're mitigated. Also, the particular product that they're using is required in this hazard mitigation analysis to be tested and certified per those standards, the National Fire Protection Association and California Fire Code codes. And so that report, the preliminary report was reviewed by our fire department, and they'll be required per the conditions of approval to have the final HMA approved as well. And then lastly, from our code, the community benefit agreement is a requirement for approval of the conditional use permit. And so that's in our code. It's also consistent with California's Public Resource Code. And before the city entered into negotiations, we required that the applicant prepare a fiscal impact analysis. And basically what that looked like was they were looking at other potential uses that could occur on this site and what would be the difference in terms of fiscal impact between those potential uses and this use. So for instance, this has a particular fiscal impact. We compared that to other uses that would be allowed in this zone, for instance, a warehouse or a warehouse with fulfillment center. And then we got numbers based on that, and the city then negotiated with the applicant to create a community benefit agreement with a benefit fee associated with it for the offset of those impacts. And that will be going to City Council for approval. It's a condition of approval that's required to be approved by City Council before they can construct. And then as far as environmental determination, they prepared the city CEQA consultant prepared an initial study and mitigated negative declaration, and it determined that the project would not have a significant effect on the environment with mitigation incorporated. And so at this time, staff is recommending that the commission adopt a resolution adopting the ISMND and adopt a resolution approving the plot plan and conditional use permit subject to the conditions of approval. And this concludes staff's presentation.
All right, thanks, Ryan. Nice presentation. This is our chance to ask any questions of staff right now at this point. Anybody? Joe?
Me? I have a number of questions, but first of all, my focus is on the security of the site. So my first question would be, there are two entrances. Are they gated or open?
Yes, they are gated, and then they're also conditioned prior to building permit to get a security plan approved for the site. And then installation of that security camera is, of that security system is verified prior to occupancy as well.
The second question would be the southern border boundary. It appears to be, if I'm not mistaken, it's an open, there's no fence, just a line of trees.
So there's a flood control channel. North of that is landscaping. And then north of that will be is the existing chain link fence, security fence, and then the site would be beyond that. So it would be enclosed by chain link fencing and the rest of the fencing around the site and walls.
Outside people can still see the structure, the facility, just by looking. Is that correct?
On the south, are you referring specifically to the
The sou-
southerly boundary still?
Right.
So it is about 300 feet from McLaughlin Road.
Yes.
And there's, as I mentioned, there's about 57, 60 feet of landscaping in between that would be blocking it. In addition, that side of the site is elevated a little bit. So there, while you can see into it, there's quite a bit of distance and some intervening rows of trees, and there will be additional trees that will be planted along that edge as well.
However, if anybody intentionally wanted to survey the facility, they could get close to the facility and look through. Is that correct?
Yeah, you would have some peekaboo views into there.
Yeah, that was my focus. I would yield to other commissioner. Yes, go ahead.
Thanks, Joe. Chris?
Yeah, is the mitigated negative deck based on the fact that there was a prior power generation plant there? They're saying, because that would have exceeded the requirements, right, and this one's under it, or?
So that was maybe one of the elements of it. They were required to do a phase 1 and actually some phase 2, which is actual soil sampling testing. And that was folded into the ISMND. So that is one component of why they were required to do an ISMND instead of just like a negative, just being exempt or something to that effect.
I guess maybe it's I've been pretty familiar with CEQA stuff. I'm kind of shocked that a negative deck is on this type of a project with all the metals and stuff in the batteries. So was there like mitigating environmental hazard steps taken to get them to that negative deck?
Well, when they decommissioned the site, they went through a process of looking at the soils, testing the soils, and then as part of getting this approval, they also had to do that to evaluate. If you're talking about the former site,
No, I'm not talking about the form. I'm talking about the
Okay.
current. So I'm talking about the environmental effect if this goes south, if we have a meltdown, if there's a fire, if there's a flood, and you've got chemicals and I mean, whatever. Every project has environmental potential impacts, and we try and mitigate them. Thus, we get a approval by CEQA. So what was done? Was there anything? In my experience, a negative deck is usually from a project has very minor environmental potential impacts. If it's something large, you throw a mall on a spot, there's going to be a full environmental impact on that. I'm just surprised there's not on this.
I think kind of what you're going back to is the hazard mitigation analysis that
Yeah.
was conducted, and how the ISMND looked at that. There's that report gives different mitigations that are required, and that help to kind of mitigate what you're talking about.
Okay. I don't want to get in the weeds on that, but if they got it, they got it. Question, just a technical thing. So this purpose of these batteries is to release energy into the grid when there's peak demand. Do they charge the batteries at, say, morning? Is that when it is, lower peak? Is that how that works?
Yeah, when the electricity is being produced by the renewable resources like wind or solar, so it corresponds. The charging of those corresponds to when those are producing.
So is the electricity coming in here to charge the battery solely from, it's coming from Edison, basically, right? There's a power line coming in, and it's their job to fund that with renewable. Okay, I just wondered. Then the last question is where all these things are sitting currently, the lot is mostly dirt and gravel. There's a few, roads in, but it's almost dirt and gravel. When they put these in, are these all going to be sitting on concrete, or are they going to be sitting on gravel?
they have, maybe the applicant could talk a little bit more about that, but they have like a base that they're sitting on, which correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that is concrete underneath the unit.
Go ahead.
Excuse me, sorry. Let's go ahead and maybe punt that question to the applicant when it's time for them to do the presentation. Thank you.
So last question to staff is, that question was leading to a CSA one, MPDS question as far as flow when it rains, chemicals coming off the site and such. Is the water flow such that everything will go into the basins, and is there any additional filtration other than dirt to catch those chemicals?
So Commissioner Thomas, there's not expected to be any chemicals in the stormwater when everything's operating normally. And those two existing stormwater basins are, they can capture the required 100-year flows with a huge factor of safety. They're probably 3 or 4 times the necessary capacity to handle those flows.
So I'm not really questioning the capacity, because
Right, and I mean, you're not gonna have chemicals in the water, you know.
well, we say we're not gonna have chemicals, and I'm, don't get me wrong, I'm for the project, but I'm just, in the case of unexpected chemical flows. So it's gonna go into the basins, and then you had mentioned in our meeting that the intention is eventually to hook those up to the canal, right? So is there any planned filtration or anything that goes from the basin to the canal? Because that's where
So-
things could go awry.
So some of that will be determined in the final engineering phase. That water will be pumped into the channel, so if there was a catastrophic event, they would not pump that water into the channel.
So it's gonna have to be pumped and not just natural
Gravity,
gravity flow.
correct.
Okay. Okay.
Good questions. Randy?
Hey, good job, Ryan. Being that the infrastructure is all there, is there any underground utilities involved in this that are gonna be constructed? I didn't see any other than storm drain. That seems like it's the channel.
There's one power pole that gets undergrounded. A lot of not all of the infrastructure is there, but a majority of it is there. And then the transmission connection to the SCE grid offsite, that's already in place.
So who inspects the connections, and what, are they the connections that are already in place, or, we'll ask you those questions in what's your time, okay? I'm just curious. We did a pretty thorough job, so, do we have any say about the, any of the power that's going into it, or is that kind of like the cell towers, that's just off bounds for us?
Will you please clarify?
So who is the authority on the voltage that's going in and?
The voltage or the type of the source of the electricity?
Yes.
I think that might be a question for the applicant also.
Okay. Okay, and my last question is, I think, so what permits is the city going to issue for this project? So we said building, right? Well,
Yeah, they
Yeah,
would be
that's the-
required to submit, well, they already have submitted for, but they would be required to obtain a grading permit, a building permit, and then a final inspection occupancy.
so it's none of the grid, it's all,
Yeah, and also street improvement plans
Right,
and
right.
storm drain improvement plans that will be processed by Riverside County Flood Control District, and we'll review those as well.
okay, thank you.
Ben, did you have any questions?
Yeah, during my meeting with staff, I had several questions that they answered for me and made me feel comfortable with regard to access, the safety of it, the employees being on site 24/7. Another one was the benefit agreement. I know we talked about it, but we didn't really talk about what that actual benefit was going to be to the city and when that was going to be delivered to the city. Could you just speak to that a little bit?
I can cover this one. So as Ryan mentioned, our ordinance does require the applicant to enter into a community benefit agreement with the city. The city council will be approving that we'll be reviewing that at their meeting next week. We negotiated a one-time payment community benefit that would be paid prior to the issuance of a building permit.
And what, can we speak to that number that the city is gonna get so that people can be aware of what the benefit of that's gonna be?
Sure.
You can say the number, just for clarification, this is still technically in negotiations,
Sure.
not yet been finalized or
Sure.
approved.
So in the draft agreement right now, it's approximately 6.5 million, with up to $1 million of that being dedicated to a future road and bridge benefit district immediately adjacent to that property for infrastructure improvements in that general area of the city.
Great, thank you. That's a huge benefit to the city, so I wanted to make that known. Thank you.
Huge. Thanks, Ben. Joe, did you have some more questions for staff?
Yes, one additional question. For the description of the battery system, I'm reading from the document. Okay, our battery system will consist of the primary battery and its cooling system. I would like to get more understanding of the cooling system. Is it self-contained in each cartridge within the cabinet, or is it integrated, interconnected, and underground? Please.
That might be one we want to refer to the applicant on.
We'll get to you. Yeah, we'll get to you guys
Yes.
real quick here.
Yes.
Any questions left for staff, specifically for staff? Okay, so we're going to move on to the next phase of this, and that's the public hearing. So let's open up the public hearing. It's 6:32. Madam Clerk, was this hearing legally noticed?
Yes, it was.
Fantastic. And was any correspondence received?
We did not receive any correspondence.
All right, fantastic. Thank you. Now, if you'd like, please join us up at the podium. Can you give us your name for the record, please?
Sure. My name is Mitch Weinberg, Vice President, Project Development for Calpine Corporation, 23 years with Calpine. Chair Ledoux, Vice Chair Thomas, council members, commissioners, thank you for your consideration today. Appreciate being here. It was a long journey with these fine folks from the city, and I really appreciate all the help and guidance and assistance we received to get to this day. So very glad to be here. I do not have a prepared presentation, but I am here to, I listened to all the questions, and if you want to just go down the row and restate them, I'm happy to give you my best answer with my reasonably knowledgeable, input on all this, but there are people that are far more technically knowledgeable than I. But I'll give it my best shot.
All right, thank you, Mitch. First question is from me. Do you agree to all of the conditions of approval associated with this project?
We do.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. All right, now is the time that we can address the applicant directly. Randy, did you want to go first?
Sure. Have you completed one of these projects similar to this, previous to this project?
We do. Calpine has 3 operating energy storage projects and a 4th one that's about, in August, will go into full commercial operation. It's in testing right now. The two operating are in Santa Ana. The one that's about to go into service is also in Santa Ana. And another one that's operating is in Hayward, California, up in the Bay Area, and that's actually at an operating gas turbine power plant. It serves a slightly different function, but.
So were there any challenges to this project that weren't in the others that you've worked on?
The other projects the one that's at an operating power plant went through CEQA with the California Energy Commission, because that's a 600 megawatt gas turbine plant, and it's got its license from CEQA, so from the Energy Commission, so we had to amend that license. The 3 in Santa Ana, it was already appropriately zoned. We didn't really go through a full-blown CEQA analysis. We went to sort of a mini CEQA. Didn't even result in mitigated negative deck. Here, the ordinance was very clear that a mitigated or a CEQA analysis and a conditional use permit was required. And so I wouldn't call it a challenge. It was just a process that we needed to go through. But I think we were pretty confident we were not presenting a risk and actually improving you know, the risk profile of this location for the community. So with guidance from everybody that you see on that side of the room, we got through a very robust process.
Thank you.
You bet.
Well,
You asked
sorry.
earlier about interconnection and who
Yeah.
adjudicates and I can, sorry, did someone else?
No, go ahead.
I can just speak to that
Yeah.
real quick. So
Right.
even though there was a connected gas turbine plant there, you cannot just show up, take it away, put batteries in, all is good. You go through a very robust process with Edison and the California Independent System Operator. That is the state's sort of grid manager. They have an interconnection queue, you submit an interconnection request. It's a 2.5-year process where they analyze all of the operating characteristics of what you're proposing to determine whether there are impacts elsewhere on the grid or on the equipment that's already there. And so we completed that process, have assigned what's called large generator interconnection agreement, specifically for energy storage on the site. And it will be the ISO and Edison that ultimately tests that we've done everything we said we would do, that our meters are readable, that we were within their safety and their safety constraints. So that's the body that sort of adjudicates the electrical grid connection side.
Thank you.
You bet.
We were talking about the Santa Ana projects, and I understand someone from your team went by and took a couple of pictures. I think IT's got those. If we can bring them up, we can actually see pictures from their actual Santa Ana project.
That's actually a good picture to show. Those are Tesla units. They are mounted on, somebody asked about whether they're on foundations, concrete foundations, or on the dirt. The answer is neither. Those are piles that are driven into the ground, and then this particular system then connects the tops of the piles with rails, and the batteries sit on the rails. So that has two benefits. One, practical for the site. Many of the connections to these batteries are from the bottom. So rather than having to trench and dig and, or pre-cast conduit in the foundations, here you can literally just access them from below. And it also limits the impervious surface you're adding to the site, so that when it rains, you don't have all of these hard surfaces that increase the runoff to the site. You can percolate right from below the battery. So it's
Is this project doing the same or
yes,
something different?
we'll be using piles and posts. So we have the same, we do not expect to use concrete slab foundations, as it were.
And what's this picture?
That's the second phase. So what you're looking at with the post and beam is the third phase at Santa Ana. That's the second phase when Tesla elected to pour concrete foundations and deal with all that trenching and all the, and then there's a first phase, which is not Tesla, it's equipment provided by GE, and that was on precast foundations. So they, in some shop elsewhere, decided where all the conduit runs were gonna be, all the bolt patterns, and it showed up on site ready, and then the battery showed, and you just literally set them down. Here, in phase 2, Tesla poured these in place. And in phase 3, we didn't use Tesla to do the construction, we used a third party, but this is the design that I think all of the battery world is sort of evolving to.
So the first picture that we were looking at on the rails, that's
Phase 3,
that's
what we're gonna do here.
Okay, thank you.
Or, I can't promise it's gonna be yellow, but it's,
Maybe it can be navy,
yeah, there you go.
navy and orange.
Are those secured to the rails or just sitting on them?
Oh, they're secured to the rails, absolutely. We're in earthquake zone 4, you've got all the, right, so everything is bolted.
Yeah, thanks for those pictures. That worked out nice.
Very good.
Any questions for the applicant, Ben?
Yeah, you mentioned it being a 2.5-year process to get the sign off on that, right?
Just on the interconnection,
Just on
yeah.
the interconnection, right? So how long do you anticipate it for both the construction of this and then for them to sign off and it to be turned on and usable?
Yeah, so I expect to start construction in earnest this spring, let's call it May. We expect batteries to start showing up on site in September, which means many of those foundations are already in, those piles. We expect to be mechanically complete in Q1, edge of Q2 of '24, and then into a testing phase in, April, May. And at least the initial chunks should be operable in June of 2024. So, that is not a super long timeline. We've built a lot of gas turbine projects as Calpine, and those are 30 months of construction, and this is just not that. The battery modules show up all reloaded with batteries, really ready to go. Inverters show up, you just do your electrical connections, your foundations and your structural, and pretty straightforward.
Great, thank you.
I have one more question. So
Sure.
is the energy that you store, is that exclusive to the same grid always, or can it be sent? Well, you'd have to have the interconnectivity, of course, but
So there's, there's what happens physically, and there's what happens sort of commercially on paper, right? So our customers are the utilities, the load-serving entities. And in many cases, they dictate when to charge and when to discharge in order to best serve the needs of the grid. If they're having an issue with under voltage, over voltage, too much supply, too little supply, they can say, charge now, discharge now.
so that's the plus to this community, that they're gonna have power.
It's Edison that
not
will, if there's a shortage at the Valley substation, they will, I can't speak for Edison. They have the right to do as they see fit. But all the energy that goes into these batteries will come from and go back to the Valley substation.
Chris?
This might be a question for staff, and you might be involved in it. Is there a bond required for decommissioning if this closes? Or some other mechanism that if it fails and it has to be decommissioned, is there some kind of funding mechanism to ensure that happens?
No, I don't believe we had a bond that's required, like at this phase now, because otherwise you'd be holding it indefinitely for the decommissioning. But
So I may be using the wrong word. Maybe it's not a bond, but maybe you're familiar with.
There is not a I'm not aware that we're posting security to the city for 25 years from now when it's time to decommission or what have you. And I realize you're talking about in the event of abandonment.
Yes,
Uh,
yeah. We don't want a brownfield or something like
No,
that.
no, fair enough.
However, the code does require a decommissioning plan be submitted and reviewed and approved by the city. And at that time, we could potentially request additional securities to cover that decommissioning process, but not at this time.
I'll just add that this equipment has a tremendous amount of inherent value, and even in an abandonment, it's unlikely it would sit there. It's unlikely our lenders would allow it to just sit there. They would want to pick it up and move it somewhere else. And the nice thing about energy storage is you can literally pick it up and move it somewhere else.
Move it, yeah. We talked about the other cities. I doubt this was happened, but is there a condition that no used batteries be stored on site?
not specifically.
So maybe you can talk to this. I was discussing it with these folks.
Sure.
My understanding is it, these pods have what, a 10-year life? What's the expected life of these?
So it's 15 plus for the batteries. On day one, we'll have a charge of batteries in each of these containers, and they will degrade over a 15-year cycle, 16, 17. You're getting below really the value of using up the space that they're taking. So you'll want to start taking out those original batteries. On the way to that 15 years, we're going to add every couple of years more batteries so that we stay at our 680 megawatt capacity level. Just like your phone doesn't hold the same charge it did on day one, over time, lithium ion degrades over time. And so we'll augment every other year or so with fresh batteries, right? But we won't remove the batteries from, from the original installation until it gets to the point where they're just taking up space. There's no storage intended of those batteries on site. They should be recycled, sent back to the vendor. We'll work out those arrangements, but they won't be stored on site. There's no room to store them on site.
So then you're phasing in installation then, because if you're gonna be adding, you're not gonna completely build out? So you're gonna, or are you gonna install everything on that diagram?
We're not going to install everything on that diagram. Some of those pads won't get, the foundations are likely to go in, and I can't speak with 100% certainty on that, but as you need to add more containers, and I don't think we'll be pulling batteries out of each individual container, we'll just add more containers. Those will come over time.
So that's why I'm saying you're not gonna initially put 100% installation.
We're going to initially put 680 megawatts of batteries on day one on site. And then as they degrade, we'll keep topping it off to stay at 680. So you are correct in so much as we're not going to fill it corner to corner on day one.
Okay.
But in terms of its performance, 680 as quick as we can get there.
That's it.
Joe?
Thank you. Going back to the question of temperature control system, can you describe how temperature is controlled within the cartridge?
Sure. You know, I wonder, Ryan, there was a picture of one of our containers. If you could put that back up. So
Sure, if we
these
can bring-
modules have 8 doors, 8 cabinets. On one of the 8,
Could IT bring up the PowerPoint?
I mean, I can just talk to it until you get it up there.
okay.
But one of the 8 is dedicated exclusively to thermal management. So these batteries are liquid cooled. There's a what's in the half, right. So it's like radiator coolant kind of a thing. Circulates through all of the battery modules, comes back to that 8th cabinet where there's a heat exchanger, like think just air conditioning unit, right? And so that's how we're going to extract heat from the batteries and then discharge that heat, you know, out to the atmosphere so that coolant goes back to the batteries. And so the battery, the container, well, does that answer your question?
Then does temperature control, would temperature control mechanism be affected by external temperature, weather?
Sure. So there's a couple things to think about. We've got some criteria really dictated by our battery supplier, but once the ambient temperature reaches 55 C, which is 131 Fahrenheit, in our view and in our vendor's view, it is unsafe, it is unadvisable because you start to lose performance to operate. So we will shut down those units at 131 F. The batteries don't fail at 131 F. They got to go to 200 C. So at 55 C, we're going to shut it down. At 200 C, they'll start to off-gas some of the electrolyte, which is all hydrocarbons and CO2.
So probably just a couple of days in August.
Yeah, that's it. So try not to use your air conditioning during those days.
Right.
However, because the cooling system releasing heat, so that would increase the temperature, the local ambient temperature. Is that correct? Because what's the temperature of the heat exchange?
Which is why you need to stop operating at 55 C, because at 55 C, you're no longer getting the benefit of your heat exchange, right? So you're not effectively cooling the coolant when it's that hot outside. And so that's why you shut it down.
Another question, if we go back to the photo from Santa Ana, all the cabinets are stacked together. Are they linked together? I'm thinking about just a minor earthquake, a lateral movement.
Yeah.
Would it have a kind of a domino effect on all of them?
So the Santa Ana site actually has units back to back. This will not. So the Santa Ana site has units that are back to back and you would open doors on one side or the other. This container, it just has doors on one side, right? And of course, it's, what did we say, 11 feet wide? It'll be, you know, it will be secured to the foundation system such that it's designed to handle California earthquake code, you know, to comply with California earthquake codes.
So the whole facility is above the safety criteria for earthquake, tornado, any hazard, natural hazard circumstance.
I can't speak to tornado because I'm not sure we do a lot of tornado designing, but yes, it is designed to meet California building codes for facilities of this nature. And so if the California building code requires you to be tornado worthy, then we will be.
Yes. I just have a general question.
Sure.
From using a cell phone.
Yeah.
When you get on an airline, they don't allow cell phone because the possibility of blowing up.
Yep.
Is there a possibility of blowing up with your battery?
So I can't say there is never a possibility, but here's what I'm going to tell you about the safety precautions in one of these systems. Your phone has a nickel, manganese, cobalt, lithium-ion battery. which is very dense, and so you can get it in a really compact space, so it's great for small consumer products, but it is prone to thermal runaway. It gets hot. These batteries are using LFP, lithium iron phosphate, which is much less prone to thermal runaway. The downside is I need more space to do it, but it's much less prone to thermal runaway. If we sense in any of our battery modules a temperature excursion beyond that 55 within each individual module, we will not just disconnect that module, we'll disconnect that string. So there are 3 modules in each string. There are 24 strings in each box. And then if it does start to off-gas and there's an issue, an explosion in a system like this would be because of a buildup of gas inside the container. So these containers have one-way valves, too, on the roof that would vent any pressure or gases that build up. So that's how you, A, you take them out of service. B, if you're in a situation where it's propagating on its own, you vent, but it's one way, so you don't let air into the container. These are designed to sit there and smother. You don't open the doors, as I'm sure the fire department will tell you. Maybe you hose down neighboring containers, but did you want to add something?
Emily, I'm
will you
sorry,
please
real
head to
quick.
the
Can you join him at the podium just so we
Or
can
I can just add that comment. Yes.
hear you on the mic?
My colleague, Emily Precht. Introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Emily Frecht. I work with Mitch in development at Calpine. Just wanted to clarify one comment is the batteries don't actually start to off gas at 55 degrees Celsius. It has to go, the temperature inside the container has to go far, far higher than that. It has to be 200 degrees Celsius in order for the batteries to start off gassing. And that's when any sensors would go off and we would take the battery out of service.
But the chances vents operate on their own.
Yes, but the vents operate on their own. But the chances of getting up to 200 are obviously far less likely than getting up to 55 degrees Celsius.
Which in August it will do.
Yes.
Quite possibly, yeah. Thank you. We just want to make sure that everybody listening gets to hear everything too, so. Of course. Joe, did you have any other questions?
Yes, I have a general question. Might be better directing my question to the department. On page 52, there is a list of accidental spills over the past 20 years prior to the decommission. I'm just assuming, maybe I'm wrong. Part of the decommissioning is require mitigation by the applicant. Is that correct?
So there was some prior spills that were identified, and so Department of Environmental Health, the county, Riverside County, we contacted them, corresponded with them, and there was required testing that was done in some of those areas to basically determine that they were below a level of significance.
Thank you.
You good, Joe? Okay, great. Randy?
Yeah, I got one last question. So what you just told us was all good by the fire department, right? So you were talking about maintenance basically, and then does the fire department, how was the fire department safety-wise cooperating with you?
Dave, do you want to jump on the podium real quick?
Obviously.
I think I can let the fire department speak for themselves.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's right, it's 60 miles out of my way here.
All right,
It was a long
hit him
way.
up, Randy.
Dave Myers here, Riverside County Fire Department, Fire Safety Engineer. And what is the question?
The question was, did they meet all your, you had plan checks and they met all your concerns, correct?
Yes, we evaluated, they provided the information that we needed to verify that they comply with the 2022 California Fire Code, Section 1207 for energy storage systems, which is based on the International Fire Code, The units are UL, Underwriters Laboratory, UL 9540 listed. They also did testing under UL 9540A, where they actually subject the batteries into a thermal runaway mode to determine if they're going to propagate and go beyond a certain level where it could be, more hazardous. So based on everything they've given us, we're content. The submittal is probably 99% right now. We haven't got the final submittal yet, but everything we've seen so far is probably 99% of what we need to see.
Right, do you do a regular inspection, like an annual, or?
We would not most likely do an annual inspection, other than maybe testing, like the applicant would have to test, or the owners would have to test the fire alarm systems,
Okay.
the smoke detection, monitoring systems, gas detection systems. Those would all have to be checked on a regular interval by the applicant, and they would have to keep records.
So it's not necessary, okay.
Right.
Thank you, Dave.
Thank
All I
you.
got.
Anybody else have questions
Yeah,
for the
can I
fire?
ask one question?
Yeah, absolutely.
So have we done a lot of these checks for these energy storage units before the fire department, or is this?
I've done three permitting systems for the energy storage system. Not to this scale. It's been, it wasn't. It was one unit similar, one at a time. Not a full scale, multiple units. However, whether it's one unit or 100 units, we're basically looking at the same thing.
Concept.
Except when you have multiple units, we're looking more at the fire access in between the units.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Dave.
Any questions for the fire? No. Okay, thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for driving. You went the long way.
Okay, Madam Clerk, were there any requests for public comment on this?
There are not.
No? Okay, anybody in the audience want to have a say? Okay. All right, so let's close the public hearing. It is 6:57. I'll bring it back to this side of the ropes here. This is for us to discuss if we have any questions or comments amongst ourselves.
I just like to say this is great for the city of Menifee. We've got secondary coverage for energy storage. So thank you, guys. Thank you, Ryan.
I'm for the project. It'll be fun to watch over time, the evolution of the batteries, and if new technology comes out, what happens. We'll be the kind of the guinea pig here. I think it was smart to use an existing site that was decommissioned, obviously, so I'm for the project.
I agree with that as well.
Yes. I was able to drive by the site over the weekend, and it looks neglected. So anything is better than the present use. And battery technology is what for our future. It's consumer usage is very volatile and moving up and down daily and seasonally. So any kind of mechanism or technology that we can stabilize the technology, it's great. And I thought this project would be the first in Southern California, and now I know we are only second to Santa Ana.
It'll be the biggest.
Oh, the biggest, okay, yes, yes. I have a general focus, and that's security for the site, because I believe this infrastructure is critical in case of emergency. So I hope you have, I think the department already told me you have 24-hour security video monitor and motion detector and everything. I would still like to see more fences all around. Yeah, some kind of protection for any trespassing. But I thank you very much for your very thorough presentation. Yes.
Okay. I want to say all of my questions and concerns have been discussed tonight with all of you guys and the applicant, so I had the same questions and concerns. So our staff was not aware of any cities around us where something like this is going on, so this is pretty cool to be the first in the IE and surrounding cities to have this. And I think it'll be pretty cool if other cities do look to our code and our development of this one when they do theirs. So Kudos to our staff and the applicant for coming up with a great project. All right, so there are 2 resolutions for adoption. We'll need a motion and a second to approve staff recommendations for both. We'll do that verbally, please.
I'll move.
I'll move.
I'll
move.
second.
Okay. Thank you. I haven't moved in a while, so.
Moved last meeting. I don't know what
Did I move?
Somebody move.
Make sure we get Randy's vote in there.
I got it.
Okay, that passes 5-0. Congratulations. I think there's still some steps to take with the city council, but
We did 'em, yeah.
I did them both.
Chair,
Ty and I arranged this before the meeting, and we're on the same page. So
Chair, if I can make a comment over here. This obviously was something new for us. We had to develop a new ordinance. There was a lot of research that needed to be done. It was a good experience because we had a good applicant that actually helped us through the process. Obviously, they were the experts, and they're always available, and sometimes too much available to help us out. But it was a good experience overall. So I just wanted to thank Mitch for everything and helping us out through this process. So obviously, you were the first ones. It was a little bit hard, but I think the next one's going to be a little bit easier. So thank you.
fantastic. Okay. Ty and I did not talk before the meeting about anything. The last meeting, you said, if we have 2, we can just move along with both, so.
That's correct. You are able to make a motion for anything within your jurisdiction on the agenda.
Moving on. Discussion items, there are no discussion items. Item number 10. Our most favorite of the evening, item number 11, our Community Development Director's comments. Do you have some comments for us tonight?
I couldn't go a couple of meetings without providing comments. So yes, I do have comments for the commission tonight. I just wanted to give a few updates and share some upcoming things going on. Next Wednesday, the City Council will be hosting a community workshop on our budget. So that'll be at 3:30 here in the council chambers. Tacos and Tequila has been processing and under construction to expand their location. They opened and quickly realized they could benefit from additional space for their restaurant. And so we are nearing the completion of that tenant improvement project, and they should hopefully have that opening in the next week or 2. Awesome. And then on the same note, another new restaurant addition up in the Sun City area, Black Bear Diner, should be opening in the next week or so as well.
Fantastic. Maybe we can get Krikorian to talk to Tacos and Tequila about pushing things through quickly.
I was going to ask, is there any update on the front buildings?
Sorry, Cheryl.
No new updates
No new
today.
updates, thank you.
I'd say I'm glad Black Bear's opening because we had no pies in the city. Now we have pies. Yeah, that's the next city over. Yeah, yeah. Need your own pie.
All right, okay. Item number 12, commissioner reports and committee activities. Do we have any commissions or activity reports to report? Nope. Okay. We did have a future agenda item last week regarding Scott Road, and you guys did do some work on that. I don't know if you want to mention what you've done on that so far.
Certainly, we've done some research. We've reached out to the speakers. We will be providing the commission a more detailed update at your next meeting when we go over the CIP and general plan consistency for the upcoming CIP. So we'll focus on that at the next meeting.
Awesome, thank you. I really like that you guys jumped on this really quick after the speakers came to the meeting, and you've been in communication with them, so that's fantastic. I love that. Okay, if there's nothing else, this meeting is adjourned. It is 7:05. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.